How to set boundaries with my prodigal child. That's our topic today, and it's going to be good. If you have a prodigal or you know someone who's had a prodigal, please share this. It's going to be great information. If you have yet to subscribe to our channel, please do that. Hit the button. If you have a question, fill out the box. We will get back to you as soon as possible, so stay with us. How to set boundaries with my prodigal child. Now, first of all, if you have a prodigal, let me just validate it's not your fault, but you're in pain. And when you're in pain, you can be manipulated, you can have strong emotions, you can make emotional decisions, you want to look for someone to blame. There's all these factors, and please get the prodigal book or the video, get in a prodigal parent group. If you haven't been in one, start one. Every church needs a prodigal parent group. Please start one, help people. Now, how do you set boundaries? First of all, you have to accept that you're going to need them. Your prodigal could have addictions, could have trauma that you don't know about. They could be out of control. They could have relationships you don't approve of. So let's talk about some of the primary boundaries you're going to need to set, okay? You're going to need to set boundaries around giving money. You're going to have to set boundaries as far as staying in your house or not staying in your house. You're going to have to set boundaries as far as what relationships you will let come into your house and what you won't. You have to set boundaries around behavior and expectations around birthdays and holidays, special occasions for the family. Those are your primary ones you're going to have to set. Now, you're also going to have to set some about expressing anger if they're volatile, or if they're cursing and swearing at you, if that's acceptable to you or not. You're going to have to really evaluate per case other boundaries you're going to need, okay? Especially if they're recruiting your children into behaviors that you don't want them to get into. Because sometimes one prodigal will try to really move the rest of the tribe into their camp to drink, do drugs, be sexually immoral, look at pornography or other things. So boundaries around the other kids can be super important for you to talk about. Now, how do you do this? Now, first of all, you have to make a major decision. Are you going to do this, number one, emotionally or principally? Emotionally is they beguile you, they cry, they scream, they yell at you, they shame you, and you give in. That's an emotional way to do a boundary, and you will set them based on how you feel, and you will probably change how you feel and change the boundary all the time, which is not good for your prodigal, and it's not really good for you, and it's horrible for your marriage. Absolutely horrible. Number two, these are principles, okay? You write them down, you set them up, and these are the principles we're gonna follow, all right? The second most important thing you're gonna do is, if you make boundaries by yourself or with the cooperation of your spouse, if you're married. If you're married, being in agreement on the boundaries is critical, and following through with the boundaries, maintaining them as a team is critical, that you don't violate a boundary without consulting your spouse. Number three, are you going to do this with another person's oversight? In other words, you and your spouse set boundaries. You put them down in writing. Then you run these by your spiritual leadership, cell group leader, pastor, a counselor, another couple that you trust, or if you're in a group, you run them by your prodigal parent group, because you're going to need accountability. Now, if you make these decisions based on principle, if you make them in agreement, and if you make them with accountability, that's fantastic. Now, in that accountability, fourthly, you want to set up consequences. And I'm not talking about consequences for the prodigal. They have consequences. They will have legal issues. They will have losing job issues. They will have all kinds of consequences, because there are consequences of being a prodigal of God. Romans 1, you see the story of Israel constantly having consequences because of their rebellion against God. And you know that the prodigal process is rebellion against God. It's not a statement about you as parents. Okay, if you haven't read the book or watched the DVD, please do stop carrying false guilt about that. The consequences that I'm talking about are consequences for yourself if you violate these boundaries, especially without consulting your spouse. So let's suppose you say, hey, we don't give our prodigal any cash, okay, unless we agree on it, and then you go ahead and give him $50. And maybe it was for a pair of pants, maybe it was for something good, but you did it anyway. You would have a consequence for yourself. Like, okay, if I violate the boundaries that we've established with our prodigal, then I will have this consequence. I'll go pick up trash for 2 hours. I will do whatever, clean a certain room or paint a certain room in the house. I will set a consequence for myself, and each spouse sets a consequence for themselves. So it's not like the spouse is spanking you, you're spanking you. Because it is the worst thing in the world for your prodigal to be able to manipulate you. God is a God of order, and that's the God that they're resisting. They're resisting that they live in a world where there is a God. Secondly, that there is order. And thirdly, that there are consequences if you violate that order. That's what they're rebelling against. So you can't be working with your prodigal from an emotional state and actually enabling them to buy money for alcohol, drugs, immorality, or an apartment they can't afford, or a car they can't afford, or insurance that they can't afford. You have to walk through these things. Now, if you agree to pay for certain things, like you pay for the car so they can get to work, you and your spouse need to be in agreement on that, and you need to stick to it. And if you violate that, you need to pay a bill for that. And both your accountability couple or your pastor or your counselor should know that you violated and that you did to your consequence, so that you are trained well to present God as a God of order. That the manipulativeness, the entitlement that every prodigal has, and we walk through that in the book and the video, you're going to have to deal with that. And if you have all this false guilt, you are going to be easy to manipulate, and you will prolong the process of your prodigal, because they can get escape from all of the consequences. They got a ticket. They can't make their car payment. They can't do this. They lost their job because of that. These are not your problems. Make sure you understand where the problem is and who owns the problem. Your child owns their problem. You don't own their problem. You raised them, they own their problem. If they have a problem, you can say, you know what? That sounds like a problem. Have a method that they can go to that has nothing to do with you. You know what? Why don't you go talk to Pastor Joe, or why don't you talk to, John and Sue, there are accountability, and tell them about your problem. And then the four of us will come up with a solution if we're going to help you or not. But we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to do this where you come in at 11 o'clock at night, yell and scream, and act like a 4-year-old demanding your inheritance of some portion so that you can continue a poor lifestyle. We're not doing that. That's a boundary. And you just let your kids know that, okay, if you want to be a prodigal, here's our boundaries. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. And we're going to stick with these. So that way they know what world they're living in, how you two are going to operate, and there's order to it. Now, the benefits of this, it protects your marriage. Because there's nothing worse than a prodigal to get between a husband and wife and rattle the cage. One of you is going to be softer, one of you is going to be more principle-based, and you're going to get mad at each other. This way you don't have to do that. Number 2, it teaches your children that there are consequences for walking away from God. So the other children don't want to live in the world that this prodigal is living. They don't want to do without your resources. They don't want to do without your shelter. They don't want to do without your provision and your support. They're like, oh, not following God has consequences. Instead of, oh, not following God means I can get everything I want from my parents and do whatever I want to do. And that's what my parents are teaching me, that actually being a prodigal isn't that bad of a deal. So how you do boundaries is sending a clear message to your family about what you really do believe about being a prodigal. It's acceptable or it's not acceptable. Now, that doesn't mean you don't love your prodigal. God has boundaries, okay? Look at the 10 Commandments. He has boundaries. He sets consequences. When Adam and Eve sinned, that was a boundary. Don't eat the tree. All right, your consequence, out of the garden. God loved Adam and Eve, and he died for them. So we know that having boundaries has nothing to do with not loving. Actually, having boundaries is loving. And if you're really weak on boundaries, maybe you struggle with worthlessness or self-esteem or false guilt, maybe you should do the Worthy series, and that could help you with your self-esteem. But your prodigal cannot benefit by you being manipulated. That is teaching them all the wrong things. And if you need help, you can always call someone here at Heart to Heart, 719-278-3708. We can help you. There's counselors that can help you walk through this. If you're not in our Parent Prodigal group, I would strongly recommend you get in that, because there's hundreds and hundreds of people that you could access as far as resources. And again, if you haven't started a group, start one. If you have one, be grateful and plug in and utilize them. I know having a prodigal is the most painful thing, and probably the longest painful thing you will probably ever experience. So my heart goes out to you, but you really need to make sure that you and your spouse, if you're married, have clear boundaries, and I hope that this has been helpful. If you've yet to subscribe, remember to do that. If you have a question about anything I'm talking about, or any of the other hundreds of videos that we have out there on YouTube, please send a question. We'll be happy to respond to you, and have an awesome day.